I'm so excited to present this panel because it combines two things that I feel very strongly about myself. When you put purpose and passion together, I think that you are unstoppable. We are all unstoppable. And this group of women here is doing amazing things in their own right in very different places. You've heard from Shalanda Baker here in Hawaii, working on energy justice issues in this state. We have Vienne Trung. You haven't met Vienne yet, but she's with Green for All, and it's a national nonprofit focused on climate justice, right? And Rose McKinney-James, and she's been working on issues of energy equity for, I think I learned yesterday, 2 decades. You're currently based in Nevada, but long-term perspective on this topic that we've been hearing a lot about this week, the power of community inclusion. And I guess what I'd love to do is start with the concept of what is a community, right? And because as we were prepping for this, I thought, well, who should be in this community? So what I would love to throw out at you ladies first is who is in the community, and should everyone in that community have equal voice, right? So should everyone's opinion get an equal weight? Rose, you caught my eye, so I'm going to start with you. Sorry.
So maybe I'll respond by saying, in my opinion, everyone should have a seat at the table. And as it relates to equality, anyone who is impacted by a regulatory decision, a legislative decision, should have the opportunity to participate at whatever level they determine to be appropriate. Mm-hmm. But they should absolutely be given a path to the table. And I think that's part of the conversation we need to have.
Yeah, so, but even put a finer point on it, like who is this? Who are we talking about?
It's people who look like me. Mm-hmm. There are people who are not fully taking advantage of many of the programs that are available. There are folks who are paying power bills, but not absolutely understanding what they're paying for. There are folks who want to participate and have lovely aspirations for advancing their own personal goals toward sustainability, but don't have the information that they need. And let me defer to my colleagues. I'm sure they have additional answers.
I love what you said, and if I can build on that. Both on the question of the table, but also on the question of should it be given equal weight. Mm-hmm. My mom had 11 kids. I'm the youngest. And when I was growing up, I had no say at the table. I was invited. Sometimes I got to eat, but I did not have equal say. Nor should I have, because I didn't have the experience and I didn't have the knowledge to really contribute to conversations around where our finances should go. We didn't have those conversations, but just to say. And to draw that metaphor out a little bit, I don't think everybody should have the same amount of say. I think people who are closer to the problems, who have more experience to the issue, or who should actually have more understanding and perspective to add, that it's different than the traditional status quo, should have more say. At a time when you have a president who can tweet out something like "Kofifi" and that be a viral issue, and you have people who are drawing from thousands and hundreds of years of ancestral knowledge who are not being heard, I think that we should give people who have not been heard more say. And I will add to the question of the table that one of the things that I struggle with, having had grown up from Oakland, which continues to be really trapped and suffocating in its own pollution, that not only do we need to have a seat at the table, but I think we should begin thinking about what does it look like for us to move the table to the communities like Oakland in our country, in our states.
Oh, I love both of those answers. I just want to say ditto, but also I think we're constantly determining who the community is. And to sort of echo the end, we do need to address the communities that have been historically excluded from the conversation. I think it echoes you as well, Rose. The idea of equity, I mean, this is a question that we've been throwing around, really is embedded in your second, or this is a term we've been throwing around. I mean, it's sort of embedded in your second question, which is, does everyone get equal weight? Well, equity says that we are trying to make sure that everyone gets to the same place. So if we have communities that have been historically excluded from conversations, historically marginalized, and have faced disproportionate impacts due to environmental justice issues, we have to get them up to the level of everyone else. So in many ways, their voices must be heard more loudly. And so once we create equity, and actually policies that can create equity, then we can have more equality in the conversation.
Is it a matter of that people aren't being invited to the conversation? Or are they being invited but not participating?
So maybe a little bit of both. In many regulatory proceedings, because they are somewhat complex, most regulatory bodies have an intervening opportunity, and so you have this representative group who may represent a certain perspective. But the reality is that most people who are impacted by those decisions are not involved. They are not sort of clued in or connected to the information that's available, and so they have to depend on networks that historically have not been involved. In my advocacy work over these 2 decades, I recognize that it's been that long, I am frequently faced with folks who have a different perspective than I do, who attempt to speak for or become the voice of a segment of the community that is not actually represented. And I take issue with that. They also use the economics of the circumstances to try to suggest that certain policies should not move forward because of the implications on X, where X has not been involved in the conversation. So they've not been given the opportunity to present their own genuine and authentic views around an issue.
So how do you tap in? I know, Jan, you just got back from Germany, I believe, or from Europe. How do can you offer examples of things in other places where maybe this is being approached in a different way? I mean, what can we learn from elsewhere?
I can share that. So I was in Germany as the opening keynote to the European Union on their conversation on green jobs, the same time that President Trump was withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, and was, from what I could see, the only American in the room. And that was not fun, representing why our president was pulling out. But what was heartening to see was that a lot of people were stepping forward, and across the country, across Europe, but also across the country, in the last couple of weeks, I think we saw NGOs and private industries and businesses and state leaders really stepping up where our president was stepping back. And that's been great. And as we do so, I think what we need to know and do is exactly what Rose said, which is be mindful in the how. Because just because a meeting was publicly noticed on a website does not mean that the community had language access. It does not mean that the community knew the website existed. It does not mean that the location was accessible in places that do not have access to public transportation, in places or for families that pays exorbitant amounts of money just for their gas. It's not really accessible depending on where the location is. And so I can share a few examples of how I've seen it done well across the country, but maybe even more helpful for you, instead of me listing the encyclopedia of practices, is if you go to a website called thecleanpowerplan.com. There is a first chapter there called Community Engagement, and it includes the best practices of across the US, and the material and the case studies and the recommendations in there are generated by community organizers and vetted by community organizers, NGOs, lawyers, and others, as these are the best case studies that we have seen in the country. So hope that's helpful.
I just want to piggyback a little bit on that. I mean, so a couple things come to mind when I think about people being at the table and whether or not they're engaged. I mean, we can create structures and institutions that create pathways for participation, but if there's no education, and if there aren't meaningful ways to actually get to the community and get them the information, then all of these structures are for naught. I mean, here in Hawaii, we have a great public comments avenue with the PUC, but many people don't have the vocabulary to even engage the PUC. Many people don't understand the magnitude of the transition that we face,
Right.
and its potential to change lives structurally. And so without that education, without sort of letting people know that this is an important issue that they should engage, and it's not something invisible. I mean, energy is sexy to all of us. I mean, we're here for 3 days nerding out, but for a lot of people, I mean, just turning on the lights is enough.
Exactly.
So we have to figure out a way to educate.
To the point of lip service, right? How does a business get involved in this without being accused of being too opportunistic? Or, I mean, because every community includes businesses, church, places of worship,
So I'll give you an example. I'm affiliated with a very large company in Las Vegas that has the largest number of employees in the state. And through our CSR efforts, she's whispering in GM, it's okay. Through our community corporate social responsibility efforts, we focus on both our customers and our employees. So by drilling down to gain an understanding of what motivates our employees and giving them a venue to advance those interests, we've been able to determine a pathway for a business to advance sort of the corporate philosophy around sustainability, but it's based on understanding the community through the lens of our employees and our customers.
Yeah, so that, I think, one of the things that the person in the White House, I can't even say his name, managed to do very well was to tie jobs to the reason you got. So how does that become, right, so the power of this transition, if you will, is that there could be absolutely amazing new jobs. So how do we rally around that and get these people involved in that way and make that argument so unbelievably economic, right? And just the powerful argument that we need.
I think that you touched on exactly what I feel like is the missing piece, communicating the why. Why should people engage in this process? Amidst the many ways that they're being attacked right now, or the different urgencies that their families are going through, as a person in a community that's suffering from poverty or high levels of crime, or access to health care, or jobs instability, or trying to figure out the cost of health care in college, why should they come to this regulatory meeting? And first is communicating why this matters to helping them either create access to jobs, diversifying their economy, reducing the cost of energy, or helping to improve their lives in some significant and immediate way that they can visually see. And then communicating how they can actually meaningfully engage in the process with dignity. That they won't be ridiculed or laughed for not using the right acronyms or synonyms or encyclopedic 5-syllable words, right? How do we make sure that they're welcomed into the room and being really meaningfully engaged in a way that is true? And I've seen it done well. So coming from your neighbor across the Pacific from California, we had a process around cap and trade. And it's immediately one of those things that people usually put the blinders on and you're just like, I don't care, I'm not interested. Because it's a pretty wonky problem, and it touched on both the regulatory agency but also the legislative process, so even more, twice as complicated. What we did is we went to the community and said, did you know that refinery across the street from you, that they can continue polluting for the rest of your life and your kid's life? And there's nothing to really mitigate that. We wanted you to be part of the process of helping to inform why this matters and what they should be doing instead. And they began to say, okay, well, I can sit with that conversation. We had an 8-10-year process at this point and have grown to an organization and a coalition of five organizations to now 150. On affordable housing, transportation, a number of people, touching on hundreds and thousands of people, and these people who were connected initially through a conversation of cap and trade, so wonky, to now being what some of our boldest and strongest advocates and supporters of environmental and energy policy, because they understood the importance of that to their lives. And so it's the why that brought them in, but it's also the immediate benefits that they saw that kept them in. And yeah.
I love what's happening in California around this issue, and I know a little bit about the coalition, so congratulations on that.
We're part of it, yeah.
Yeah, so, one of the issues that came up in the panel yesterday was this idea that the frontline organizations, NGOs, who have worked with communities on affordable housing issues, on social justice issues, are not always energy literate. Right. And so that's a gap that I've identified as an educator to sort of get that coalition that's already working with those communities to understand what's happening on the energy front and understand the stakes that are at play. I mean, in California, when we have multifamily housing that can, put up solar panels and then displace any sort of dirty generating plant, I mean, that's major for those communities. I mean, it's economically empowering and also will change the circumstances, the day-to-day lived circumstances of that community. So it's powerful.
So this notion of empowerment is absolutely critical to the conversation. I think you know that we've just finished the Nevada legislative session. We were shocked by our ability to pass all 11 of our clean energy bills, 9 of which have now become law. Incredibly impressive outpouring from communities and representatives of communities who had never been involved in this process, because there was a very strategic and very direct attempt to identify those who needed to be a part of the conversation, and they became empowered and emboldened. And policymakers and decision makers were hearing from people that they'd never heard from before. And it helped to change the trajectory of the conversation. So we have an example of what can occur when you thoroughly engage those who want to have a voice in their own destiny. I mean, that was the critical component. And we did speak to the economic development opportunities. We did speak to the job creation. But we spoke, more importantly, to a change in demographic. And I'm not just talking about ethnic, I'm talking about folks who are 40 years younger than I am for the first time, actively involved in the conversation.
After Professor Baker.
Now we're getting started.
Professor Baker.
I love it. Well, one of my concerns and why I do this work is, look, we had the head of DBED stand here and talk to us about climate change, and it is a real issue, right? We have Naomi Klein, who wrote This Changes Everything, and we know that the threat is imminent. And what could happen is that we suddenly realize that we need all of this infrastructure in the ground, we need all of these changes to be made, and we have to do it yesterday, and it will absolutely mean the cementing in of inequality. But if we are thinking about the inequality issues up front, and if we're thinking about ways to use energy as a tool for economic empowerment now, then when we are faced with climate change, we won't have to scramble, right? I mean, it's imminent, but we're designing the plans that hopefully can embed equity, as opposed to after the fact saying, well, we'll think about poor people later. We'll think about, the most marginalized and the most vulnerable to climate change later, and it won't get us anywhere.
Exactly, and when we do that right, I think, because when we're in the community, not only is there an opportunity to build with each other, but there's also a looming threat. Coal companies, they pass out backpacks, like right before school. There's a deep level of community investment. Shell and Chevron has invested heavily into families and helping to provide, $100 gift cards for your gas tanks. So they have built a relationship with neighbors, and what they say around all these environmental and energy policies is, they're trying to gouge you. These energy elitists are trying to gouge you, and so don't trust them, trust us. And so if we don't begin to understand the importance not only of having the space and conversation that is inclusive, as a necessity to having good policy, but also as a way to understand that we have lost in the fight and we are behind in building the community already. And if we do this right, then it's not only a threat about what we're moving against, which is a climate change and the 200 million climate refugees we may get by 2050, projected by UN. If we don't do something, the threat is there, but also the opportunity is there. We can heal how we treat each other and how we treat Mother Earth. We can begin to build and support grassroots democracy. We can begin to create economic diversification in places like Appalachia to Sovereignty Land, to other places across the country, to Navajo Nation. And when we do that right, then we can actually begin to move away from the fear to moving into a compelling vision of the future. That's where I want to spend my time.
I love that. When Shalanda spoke a couple of days ago, she introduced this concept to me of energy democracy. And I'm probably going to leave this conference with that as sort of underscoring my thoughts about this topic. But I think the other thing is I want to challenge particularly those who are in industry, who are coming into communities and attempting to advance sort of their priorities, to understand that it's important to seek first to understand and then be understood. Not this arrogant notion of we know best and we're smarter than you and we're going to do what's in your best interest without determining a path to a conversation where you at least ask. Just ask the question. It is incredibly important. We built a remarkable coalition by simply being willing not to be the smartest person in the room and ultimately finding out that in many instances we were not, to advancing policies that will be beneficial to the broadest of our community participants.
One question from the sidebar, Elaine?
You guys are asking all the questions that we have. So at this point, I mean, it's awesome in that, you know, we were really interested in how can businesses get involved and how can people in the audience specifically get involved. And, you know, you guys are kind of answering a lot of these questions, but I think maybe getting into some of the more specifics to say, you know, how should businesses work with your specific organizations or specific other coalitions, or what can people specifically do right now in their work?
So, and this could probably be the wrap-up question, and I loved the examples that you gave, Bien, of the way the oil and coal industries have engaged. So what can, you know, businesses are ready to really engage, I think, for the first, like, seriously, and cities, and there's a lot of really great momentum. So let's give this audience some words of advice, some tips for engagement in the days and months ahead. Shalanda, we'll start with you.
Well, so from where I sit at the university, I think providing tools of education is the key, and we'll be providing those tools. So we're developing a framework to roll out into communities so that they have information about Hawaii's energy landscape, and that will hopefully engage those communities in the energy conversation. We're working through other stakeholders who've already been in the conversation or who are frontline social justice organizations to give them those tools so that they can also work with communities. So stay tuned, but there will be more information in the hands of communities pretty soon.
Yeah, and I would echo the same thing. And at a time when you have governmental leaders stepping aside or stepping backwards, it's more important than ever for businesses to step forward and to help the community. And you can do that by how you are hiring, your hiring practices. You can help that by looking at how do you support publicly the role of equity. Series, which is helping to organize the business community around a lot of sustainability issues. Their companies have said that equity is a non-negotiable in carbon pricing. That's huge, and that sends an important signal to the rest of the community that this is not just a social justice thing, but it's a community thing. And then you can also provide resources and donate in-kind materials. So we worked with Medline in donating medical supplies to Flint when they were suffering, and that has been crucial for the community. So think about the materials that you have and how that can be helpful to communities that don't have any.
So I think the business community has a very real opportunity to leverage. They can leverage their insights, they can leverage their intellectual capacity by being an active stakeholder and first coming to understand the needs of the communities in which they conduct business, and then being a partner in those conversations, most specifically by being engaged themselves and not just being on the receiving end. A business has the capacity to provide both economic resources, and I want to underscore the intellectual resources that can become very important to the education component, to the job creation component, to the pipeline component. And so just being present and active can make a meaningful contribution.
Thank you, ladies, for being at the forefront of this movement and for caring and for being smart about it. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much. Please thank you.